This is The Road Show, and I'm your host, David Warren. Well, today is Therapy Day with our friend Kim Har, a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist. Today's topic is loneliness. More specifically, leaving loneliness behind. Welcome back, Kim.
Thank you for being here, David.
Well, I have my cheat sheet here that I have been reviewing over these past few days regarding leaving loneliness behind. And this may be the most important interview or therapy session that we've ever had on these airwaves at Oasis Radio Network. This is quite the topic.
It is, and I agree. It is a very important topic.
All right, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag, and then we'll dive into it here in just a bit. But I read a statistic that you provided that nearly 1/2 of Americans today say that they are lonely.
That's right. You know, I think the actual statistic is maybe for like 47%, but this statistic is people that are like ages 0 to 99, and almost half of them reported feeling lonely.
Wow. Well, we're going to dive into that here in just a bit, but as always, we like to start our time together, David Warren and Kim Hardy Har Har, with a Hardy Har Har story.
I think you like the Hardy Har 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 stories. Well, I told you when I came in, I'm actually getting ready to go on a trip. It is vacation time. And I am
For you?
For my husband and I. Yes, it is vacation time for my husband. And we are getting ready to go to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan in Canada.
Now, that's where you're from, isn't it?
No, I am from Canada. I was born in Manitoba, Canada.
Okay.
57 years ago. But that was Manitoba, and Saskatchewan is, I think it's 2 provinces over. A province in Canada is kind of like the states in the United States. And so in Saskatchewan, I have a younger brother, and he and his wife own a hunting and a fishing lodge. And they have, to get in there, you have to fly in a float plane. So you're landing on water, and you're flying in on an airplane that like holds 5 people, 6 people. So it's a pretty small plane. And my husband and I got the wild hair idea. It might be fun to take my parents. So we are actually taking my 86-year-old father and I think my mom is maybe 80. We're taking them with us. And we are going to get them on a float plane. We're going to fly into a remote island. We're going to get them in a boat. So we're excited.
Well, tell me what will take place at the hunting lodge.
Well, you know, I think hunting season in Canada in that area I think it's maybe over now, but they have huge bears that, you know, people will go in and hunters will come in and they will shoot, I think it's brown and black bears. You know, it's kind of interesting that my brother used to live in Tulsa. And when he and his wife moved, she had shot a bear, and it's this huge bear, but they couldn't move it. And so right now it is in the upstairs of my house. And so the upstairs of my house looks a little bit like Bass Pro. It's a great conversation piece, but we are going for the fishing and the family.
All right, I need to do a disclaimer here because
I know not everybody likes hunting.
No, let's just put it this way. I would not have a bear in my apartment. So, or would I do what it would take to get a bear in my apartment?
I wouldn't either. Well, I wouldn't have an apartment. No, I wouldn't have a bear in my house if it weren't for my brother needed a place to store it. And so it has been interesting, though. It is a great conversation piece. We will have couples come over to the house, and it's so funny that, like, mostly the men are really intrigued to go upstairs. And it's really sweet. I have a 2-year-old granddaughter and a 4-year-old granddaughter. And every time we go upstairs, they want me to remind them. They will say, "Grandma, now it's not real, right?" And they'll growl at it, but they're somewhat intimidated by it.
Now, you're not guaranteed to have a bear sighting when you go to the lodge.
I don't think so. I don't think you can guarantee it, but the chances are you're going to get one.
So what do fun 50-year-olds and 80-year-olds do for a good time at a hunting lodge when the bears are not around?
Fish.
Okay.
We fish. And because with COVID, my brother's lodge was actually closed for several years. So the fishing is better than ever because the lake wasn't fished for 2 years. And so the pictures I'm seeing of some of these fish are really, really big fish. So we're going to go fishing. We're going to go have a shore lunch. I'm going to introduce my husband to a little bit of what I grew up at, because I did grow up at a fishing lodge in Ontario.
Okay. Is this the kind where you put the big wading boots on?
No.
And you get into the water to fish?
No, we get in boats.
Okay.
We get into, I don't know what brand they are, but I think they're like Lund boats. They're maybe have 3 seats in them and maybe I don't know, 50, 75 horsepower motors.
Okay. So is it still fishing? Like you just stop and you fish?
You troll.
Okay, you troll.
You troll, you jig. Yeah.
Okay. I know what troll means. I don't think I know what jig means. But...
Jig is just putting your line in the water and letting it kind of go to the bottom with the weight. And you just, once it's all the way on the bottom, you just pull your pole up and then you let it down. And you pull it up and let it down. And so you're kind of like teasing the fish.
All right. So what fish will you be teasing?
Walleyes.
Walleyes?
Northern. I think those are the 2 main ones.
And then do you eat these fish afterward?
We catch and release. That's the lake there. It's catch and release, although you can keep like your limit in smaller fish. And we'll eat a shore lunch. So it'll be fun.
Well, too bad it's not catch and release for the bears, but that's my own little opinion on this side of the microphone.
I don't know if once you caught them, you'd want to release them. I think at that point, you either get rid of them or you're in trouble.
Oh, my goodness. Well, you're going to have a great time.
I'm going to have a great time. I'm looking forward to it. Just kind of that self-care of unplugging for a while.
It's probably been a while since Peter and Dorothy have been up in Canada.
It has probably been, I'm going to guess, about 5 to 7 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're excited about seeing my brother and his wife. And I'm a little, okay, this is going to be interesting. You know, getting on a float plane is not that easy.
All right. Will you do me a favor?
Take pictures?
Take pictures, and I want to put my favorite picture of you guys up on our Facebook page.
That sounds good. I will.
Catching a fish.
I will.
Or running from a bear, your choice.
Catching a fish it will be. Catching a fish it will be.
Okay, well, that's a good story. Didn't have a lot of heart element to it, but it's very interesting, and I'm a little jealous, I gotta say. So I'll live vicariously through Andrew and you in this case.
Well, I'll give you a quick hearty-har. I always tell you that it's either going to be my dog or my grandkid I'm going to talk about. Well, we're going to have to board Rachel the dog during this time that we're gone. And I have like this love-hate relationship with my dog. And we came home the other day, and my husband had taken out a pound of butter, so 4 sticks of butter.
Oh, no.
He was going to cook something, and we came home, and all 4 sticks of butter were gone off the counter. So my...
Now, wait a minute. Is this an indoor dog?
Yes.
Okay. Second question.
How big is she?
No. No. It has nothing to do with size. It has to do with, did you catch this before? Like, it didn't happen when you were away for quite a few hours. You know where I'm trying not to head with this.
Oh, yeah. It was bad.
Okay. All right.
It was. But the funny thing was, as we come home and there's like 4 sticks of butter gone. And we get home and she just looks at us with this guilty look and she automatically goes to her crate. She knows the procedure. She goes to her crate. And of course she was sick for a few days and that was just awful. But it was, I think Andrew and I went away for a weekend and we came back and we were just washing the sheets on our bed. And when we pulled the sheets off the bed, we saw 2 of those sticks had actually made it behind our bed. So there was 2 sticks of butter under our bed and it was... So we're boarding Rachel. We're not leaving her at home unattended.
Didn't she get into like a birthday cake or something before?
Yes. She's been into brownies and cakes and yes, and you would think we would learn, but this was like on a tall counter. And I tell you, nothing is safe at our house.
Why don't you put everything away before you leave for the day?
I think we do. We actually do now. We thought butter was safe. Butter. This is a public service announcement. Dogs like butter. Who knew?
Oh, well, that is A hearty har story, not to be forgotten. All right, well, I'm David Warren here with Kim Har, who has a day job, and we're going to dive into that day job because she's a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist, as I mentioned earlier, and will again. And we're talking about leaving loneliness behind. That's our topic when we return after this. I'm David Warren here with some exciting news for Oasis listeners. We have a new mobile device app. It's free, easy to download, and lets you enjoy our refreshing music and talk everywhere you go. If you have an Android cell phone, go to the Google Play Store. And if you have an iPhone or iPad, visit the Apple Store and search for Oasis Radio Network. Be an Oasis ambassador and share this news with family and friends around the world.
From a dry, thirsty land, I found an oasis of love. Oasis Network.
On today's Roadshow, I am David Warren, your host, and serving as our guest and in-house therapist is Kim Har. And Kim, today's topic is very interesting, leaving loneliness behind. And since I have an advanced copy of your notes, you start off by saying that this is an unprecedented health crisis.
That's right. That's right. It's being actually termed as a silent epidemic. And when we think about epidemics, those are usually pretty scary and they affect everybody. And the statistics are, you've already said that half of Americans report feeling lonely, left out, but it's not just Americans. It is actually a global epidemic, and some of those statistics are in the UK. They have actually made a cabinet position called the Minister of Loneliness. And in the UK, it is, I think it's 41% of Britons, they report that either their TV or their pet is their main source of company. In Japan, there was a study that was done by the government, and they found that more than 500,000 people had not even left their home or had any outside contact in over 6 months. And we're not talking just about COVID. This is before COVID, after COVID. So this is becoming known as a global epidemic, and it affects us in all areas of life. It affects everybody in all areas, and it doesn't discriminate.
What do you think qualifies as being lonely?
I think loneliness, well, first of all, what is loneliness? Loneliness, it qualifies as it's an emotion, but when I went to like Merriam-Webster's dictionary, it actually talked about it being, it's when we're cut off from others, is when we're sad from being alone, it's a feeling of bleakness or a feeling of desolation. And so loneliness is a emotional state of being that's affecting us, and it usually means we're not having the contact that we want. We have fewer social connections than we want, but it's not a good thing.
You know, when we think of loneliness, we tend to think of people, well, single people. We also think of older people.
That's right.
But I like what you say in your notes. In fact, you underlined this. This caught my eye. You say we need to take loneliness seriously for all age groups.
That's right. You know, when I say that it doesn't discriminate, it affects old, young, it affects all socioeconomic statuses. You know, if you look even in the media, you look at like celebrities that you think, man, they don't have any problems. They've got all these people around them. You know what? Many of them report feeling lonelier than ever having a bunch of people around them. So it doesn't discriminate. And the reason we need to take it seriously is one of the byproducts of loneliness or untreated loneliness. It can get as serious as leading to things like suicide. And so you don't ever want to take anything like that for granted.
All right, so you just mentioned that it affects all age groups, and I thought this would be interesting for our listeners today. It's a short pop quiz, just one question, and this is to you, listening family. Who do you think is the loneliest group based on age? Out of these three groups, who do you think is the loneliest? The 16 to 24-year-olds, the 65 to 74-year-olds or the 75 and up? I'm going to repeat those three groups. The 16 to 24-year-olds, the 65 to 74-year-olds, or the 75 and up group. Which one do you think is the loneliest group out of those three? And the answer is?
The answer is the millennials, which is the age 16 to 24. I think most people would come in and say, well, it's the 75 and older. It's all of the older population, but it's actually one of the youngest populations that report being the loneliest.
You just mentioned the tagline there, tag word,
Yep.
or label, millennials, but this group is also known as Generation Lonely.
That's right.
Wow.
Isn't that sad?
Yeah, what do you think the root causes are of that?
With millennials, one of the biggest causes is social media. Because with social media, with millennials, first of all, they are the ones that are on their social media. I think it is almost, they don't go an hour without checking their social media, without their Facebooks, their TikToks, their Instagrams. And when you get on that, a lot of times they judge their worth by how many likes they get, how many shares they get on their social media, but they see other people's lives, and we all do that, but they can see other people's lives and compare themselves, come up as short, nobody wants to be around me. And so that's probably one of the very biggest reasons, is that comparison with social media. But the other one is because they are so young, they don't understand that emotions, feelings, they actually do pass. And doesn't have to be a lifelong sentence. They're scared of emotions.
But I don't see this changing anytime soon. I don't see young people wanting to put down their phones or their iPads, their tablets.
Right.
Is it FOMO, fear of missing out?
Right. It's kind of that fear of missing out. It's this illusion of how much fun everybody else is having. It reminds them what they're not having. Plus, there's things like bullying on social media and, ostracization. But it's not getting better in that they're wanting to put their cell phones down. But I think what we can do as parents, as families, is how can we engage and not let that be their only socialization.
Right. And so often social media is really social replacement. Mm-hmm. And that's one of my pet peeves, is to be at a table with people. And I mean, I understand if you're expecting a phone call regarding your child, or, I got a call into the doctor's office, and if my phone rings, I need to take it. But just the temptation of being with someone and their eyes are darting down constantly to look at their phone, that's not being social.
Yeah. That's actually even a problem I have in therapy. I will have clients that come into my counseling room, and if I don't specifically in the very beginning just kind of set some parameters and boundaries that, let's put cell phones down, turn it on silent, put them in your purses, your jackets, because otherwise it is so common that I will be talking with a client and eyes will revert back down to a cell phone to see if anybody's trying to get a hold of them. Now, they're not scrolling social media in counseling, but it's kind of it's like they're always on call, always tied to the cell phone.
If you think of social media or the device, the cell phone, the smartphone, the tablet, the iPad, as kind of in a way, it's a robot, and you're replacing humans with robots. Mm-hmm. As your entertainment and supposedly social interaction.
And I think sometimes people they buy into the belief, like if I asked you, how many friends do you have on social media? And people will have 500 to 1,000 to 2,000 to 3,000. And it's like, how many of those actually are in a friendship relationship with you? Or is it more we're just kind of looking at each other's lives, but how much interaction are we having? And so there's this illusion of, I have all these friends, but are they really my friends? Do they really know me?
In your notes, you list some of the myths regarding loneliness, and you just touched on the first one, and that is that a person with a high number of friends, or in this case, social contacts, is not lonely. And it can be quite the opposite, as you said. In fact, in the case of like a Hollywood star that's very isolated but has a zillion followers.
You know, I was listening to a podcast by a very well-known psychologist. Well, she's actually not even a psychologist. She is a media personality that does a lot of therapy interviews. And one of the things that she said on her podcast, she admitted to she had felt lonely. And she said, I'm looking on my social media and I'm seeing these weddings that people are going to and these vacations they're taking and their families that are getting together. And she goes, and I know a lot of these people. Why wasn't I invited? And she talked about how even in that you have so many people around you, but they can be surface relationships. And we feel like almost like we're on the outside of a window looking in. We're looking in at everybody else. One of the things, too, is it's not about the number of acquaintances, friends that we have. It's really more about the quality of them.
It's the level of connection.
It's the level of connection. And, I'll say even personally, in the last year, I've gone through a, fairly big struggle in our family in a health situation. And there's a lot of times I have reached out to friends. But these are friends that have been the ones that call and they say, we're praying, or you can contact and say, hey, I'm struggling here. Those are what friends are. And so just because you have a big number of friends doesn't mean I'm really connected. And that's what we're looking for. God made us for connection.
Our topic today is leaving loneliness behind, and currently we're talking about some of the myths regarding loneliness. And I love this myth here.
I know where you're going.
This is a good one. Married people aren't lonely.
I will tell you, as a licensed marriage and family therapist, sometimes married people are the loneliest of all. Because when you're married, it's like, okay, I'm spending more of my time with one person than just going out with all my different friends. And in marriages, just simply over time, we can disconnect. We can get into transactional living where our conversations are more about what's for dinner, what time will you be home from work, who's picking up the kids. And so we get very surfacey in our relationship, and that can feel really lonely. Also, we just get into negative patterns sometimes where, couples can say, well, we're together at home, we're spending time together, but if I ask, what are you doing together? Well, one of them may be on the couch watching television while the other's at a desk on the computer. So we're together, but we're not connected.
So proximity does not equal connection.
That's correct.
Will you give us some good tips before we say goodbye?
I will.
Okay. How sad to be lonely and living with someone like a spouse.
Mm-hmm. But, sometimes I think that with that, many married partners can look at the other like it's your job to make me not lonely. And I'm not being proactive myself, so it's your job to entertain me.
One of the questions that I wrote down that was not in your notes is it my responsibility if I'm lonely to do something about it? That is.
Absolutely.
So it's not somebody else's responsibility if I'm lonely. It's my responsibility.
Other people's actions can contribute to it. Like if I have family members and I'm never invited down, or I'm in another state, or I'm feeling forgotten, there is a certain amount of what I can do and what I cannot do, but I cannot control somebody else's decisions, their actions. And so if I have a need that's not being met, I'm the only one that can do something about it. And if it's not going to be met, it's not my family's responsibility to meet that. If I have a need, if that doesn't meet it, I need to find a place where I can meet that need. But that's really good news, because that means I don't have to stay lonely. I get to change that.
If it is to be, it is up to me.
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, here's another myth. If you're alone, such as being a single person or you live alone, then you must be lonely.
Right. And you know what? There's nothing further from the truth. Many people choose to be alone. many people, it's not a feeling of nobody wanted me, nobody chose me, and we get into that negative mindset.
It's, I don't want none of you around me.
That's right. There are lots of people that thrive as living alone in a single life and are thrilled and happy, and their lives are fulfilled and they're energetic and they're doing things. And so just because somebody is alone doesn't mean they're going to be lonely.
Look at me, Kim.
I know. You know what? I think of you. I don't think of you as a lonely person.
I don't feel lonely.
If you were, you'd probably reach out to me and say, "What do I do?"
I know you're on vacation right now.
That's right.
Running from a bear, but I'm a little lonely.
Yeah, I'm really lonely.
And then the final myth, before we take a break, is that just because you're older, it means that you're lonelier.
That's right.
So it's not an age thing.
It is not an age thing. You know, when you are older, it is more, if you're lonely, it's not due to your age. It's more due to factors around you. Like you may have lost a spouse or a partner. You may have functional limitations as your body's getting older. You may not be able to do things, but it's not an age thing. It's more of what are those factors, not old age itself.
Well, I'm David Warren here with our friend Kim Har, and our topic today, our therapy topic, is leaving loneliness behind. And it's important that we do leave it behind because when we come back, we're going to find out how loneliness impacts our health. Plus, Kim, a.k.a. the PDF Queen, has returned with a free resource for you, our listening family, and I love it. It's so pretty. You must have done this yourself.
I had it done. I designed it, but then I sent it to get done.
Well, it's Kim approved is
Yes,
what
it
it is.
is.
And
Yes, it
it's
is.
a lovely PDF. How do I make friends? And then where do I make friends?
That's
so
right.
we'll tell you how you can get that here in just a bit.
I'm Karen Jensen Salisbury, one of the hosts you hear on the Oasis Network Roadshow. For 35 years, this 1 hour of the day has inspired and motivated you, our listeners, with thousands of stories of people whose lives demonstrate the truth that, with God, all things are possible. It's an hour that you should make a part of your day, Monday through Friday, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Central. The Roadshow, an Oasis Network presentation.
It's Therapy Day on the Road Show today. I'm David Warren, your host, and Kim is here. Tell us what your official title is and how long it took you to get that title, Kim.
A long time. My title is I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist. And both of those are master's level degrees. So I got my bachelor's and I got my master's in marriage and family therapy. But after I graduated with my master's, I then had to go and sit as a candidate or as a new licensee under someone that was already a licensed supervisor. And so I did that for 3,000 hours for one of my licenses and 2,000 hours for my other license.
Wow.
So it's a lot of hours. It's a lot of studying.
And that's why your roster is full.
And that's why my roster is full.
And it helps that you're a delight, by the way. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you for being with us again today. So is this being lonely, is this a big concern that you hear about from your own clients?
Oh, absolutely. And that goes back to when we've got this misconception that it's just for older people. It's really for all different ages because it may be an adolescent that's, changing grades, that doesn't have friends. It may be somebody going to college. It may be an empty nester. It may be somebody as they are getting older. So I don't think that there's any age that is immune to it.
All right. Well, before the break, I mentioned that you would share with us how being lonely, how it's more than just our emotions, it affects our physical health.
It does. It affects our physical health. There's health impacts, and then there's also our emotional and social impacts. But the health impacts of, I will say, chronic loneliness, because I want to maybe clarify that we are all lonely from time to time.
Sure.
We feel alone. We may feel lonely, left out, but we're talking about a chronic state of loneliness. And when you have a chronic state of loneliness that is going on for a period of time, it can reduce the average life by 15 years. Not only that, it is twice as much, it affects us twice as much as heavy drinking. It affects us 3 times more than obesity. It affects us by triggering our stress hormones in our bodies, so we're always having that feeling of anxiety. It's as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And this is one that the AARP, which is for the older Americans, they reported that older adults who are lonely are 64% more likely to develop or struggle with dementia or advancing Alzheimer's disease.
Wow.
So there is such a tie to our physical well-being with this. If simply the emotional part alone isn't worth doing something about, taking care of our physical bodies is important, because it also raises risks of things like cancer, stroke, heart attack, and it leads to things like insomnia. It leads to depression, and it can lead to unhealthy habits like drug abuse, alcohol, everything like that.
I would think it's kind of a gateway to depression, that if left unchecked, it would be very easy to become depressed.
I think it's both. It leads to depression, but then it also, when you are depressed, one of the symptoms of depression is withdrawing and wanting to isolate. So it's almost like this circle on this hamster wheel that feeds each other, and it just keeps it going.
When is it time to see a therapist regarding being lonely, depressed, this area that we're discussing today?
Sure. I think that when you're noticing that it is actually affecting your lifestyle, it's affecting, I'm not leaving my house. It is, I'm having those symptoms of depression. I'm wanting to isolate. My moods are down. Maybe it's that negative mindset. I'm telling myself things like nobody cares about me. I'm all alone. When it's affecting you and you're not happy. When you're not happy, that's a part of being able to seek professional health. But it doesn't have to be that. You don't have to wait until it gets bad. You can actually, when you just notice there's a pattern of, what, I'm not thriving here. I'm feeling like there's this emptiness, because we shouldn't be scared of loneliness. And what I mean by that is loneliness is an emotion. That's all it is. And all of our emotions are simply meant to bring us information. And so if I'm lonely, it's almost like having a conversation with loneliness and saying, okay, loneliness, what are you not happy with? What are you needing? Because loneliness just simply is telling you, you need to have some social interaction and some friends. So take that information and do something with it, and loneliness will leave.
I love that. I mentioned earlier the proactive statement of, if it is to be, it is up to me. One of the things that I've talked about from time to time on this program, The Road Show, I'm David Warren, by the way, is that in my journaling daily that I have a little area for outreaches. And I learned this from the late, great Dr. Stan Toller, and he had always reached out to 5 people before his head hit the pillow at the end of the day. And so I do that as well. In fact, I have it's on my to-do list when I come to work, and sometimes I've got 2 of the 5 already done by reaching out with a text, making a phone call, sending an email. But just to remind yourself, it's just like, how many glasses of water did I drink today?
That's right.
It's keeping track of that. And so if you're keeping yourself self-accountable, then that's really going to help you out a lot by you initiating the outreach.
That's right. Well, and it also keeps our eyes off of just of ourselves. We become other-focused, and we want to keep that in balance. We don't want to be just other-focused, but we don't want to be just self-focused either. And so it's finding that balance of just like you said, who can I reach out to? And it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can just be I was thinking of you today and said a prayer. It may just be a phone call that says, just calling to check in. So they don't have to be big things. But when you're doing that, you are being proactive.
That's right. Also, I count an outreach, which I call them 5 outreaches for the day, when I have an interaction with, let's say, the cashier at the store. Beyond just, thank you, just like, oh, what an interesting name, or, oh, I like your hair, or, what a cool blouse or shirt or whatever you're wearing today, making that interaction. It's the connection we're going for here.
That's right.
Because really, connection is a loneliness buster.
Yep. People want to feel seen. They want to feel heard. and they want to feel important. And so when you can see somebody, and it doesn't mean you're going to become best friends with the cashier at the store, but you don't know, and this is something about loneliness, never assume everybody's okay. Never assume that everybody's got their circles of friends full. And so if you can look for opportunities, and I love to just pray and say, Lord, today, give me your eyes to see who I need to see. Give me the words that they need to hear, and let me just be your hand of outreach. And when you begin to do that, all of a sudden, you're not going to be having the negative mindset that says, nobody needs me, I don't matter. All of a sudden, there's an excitement of, okay, ready or not world, here I come.
Well, Kim, you have some great tips for us that's coming up, and it's going to be on building connections with others. So I've just gave a couple of examples here, but you've got many more coming up here in just a bit. But before we take our final break for today, Kim, I'd like for you to share those 2 websites that you do share from time to time, how somebody can find a good therapist.
Sure. If you are looking for a good Christian therapist, I like to refer out several different websites. One is focusonthefamily.com. They do a really good job of vetting all of their therapists. I am one of their referred therapists, and they make sure that, the therapist beliefs line up with what Focus on the Family, what they portray in their organization. Also, there's AACC.net, which is the American Association of Christian Counselors. And then lastly, there is newlife.com, and that is Stephen Arterburn's ministry.
Okay.
Every one of those, you can go to the resources, and it will say find help, connect with a counselor in your area. You put in your zip code, and they will route you to a good counselor.
And if somebody wants to visit a website with an attractive woman that might be in Canada at the time you hear this.
That's right. You can go to there'shopehere.com.
Catching fish and running from bears. All
That's right.
Well, I'm David Warren here with Kim Har. Again, her website, there'shopehere.com. She does have a phone number, 918-277-0777. Again, when we come back, great tips on overcoming loneliness and building connections with others. Back for the wrap-up after this. I'm David Warren, Program Director at Oasis Radio Network and one of the hosts of this podcast. All of our hosts enjoy hearing from you, our listening family, so drop us a note. Our email address is roadshow@oasisnetwork.org. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and you'll receive new episodes on your mobile devices. And now, back to the show. We're having a great session today, a therapy session, that is. I'm David Warren in the hot seat on good behavior with our resident therapist, Kim Har. And I have to remember to keep it professional, Kim, when we're together because we have so much fun. We went to school and graduated actually 40 years ago.
That's right.
40 years ago, you and I graduated as the valedictorian and salutatorian.
You always bring that one up. Yes, he wants to tell you that.
I am not going to say.
He was the valedictorian, and I missed it by probably a few points. He was my superior.
No, I'm saying we're pretty smart, okay?
We are. We are pretty smart. Now, we should say, too, our graduating class only had, 35 people?
We had more than that.
40?
This is why I'm valedictorian. I think we had around 50-something.
All right.
Yeah.
But we were still the top.
We were the cream of the crop, that is for sure. All right. So we're talking about overcoming loneliness, and this is something that you deal with a lot with your clients. Mm-hmm. And so you're there to give them help. In fact, your practice is called There's Hope Counseling. Mm-hmm. There's Hope Here Counseling. So let's get some great information in before we say goodbye.
Okay. So the very first thing that I like to really stress is begin with your family. When we're talking about loneliness, I'm going to go back to don't take for granted that everybody in your family isn't dealing with something that maybe you're not aware of, especially with kids. Look at that generation of that millennial, the ones that are in college, the high schoolers. So don't assume that everybody's just fine. So begin making routines with your family. Decide we're not going to be a family that we isolate from each other. We're eating in front of the television. We're just going off doing all of our own activities. So begin with your family. Eat together at the table. Ask questions. Be interested. Witness each other's lives, because our pouring into our families is really our first ministry.
One of the things that Sandy Patty does that she shared with me, and I've heard others say this, is when she is at the dinner table with her family, hopefully with all the cell phones face down or not even in the room, is they go around the table and say, what was your high today? And then what was your low today?
Right. Well, and I think that even during a certain period of time, Chick-fil-A used to have like a little box on the tables on their, like the tables where the diners would eat if you came inside to eat. And it was for if all the family put their cell phones in there, they'd get like maybe some free, waffle fries but just be intentional with your family. Take the time to call them. Now, especially, it may be, again, all different ages, but if you've got parents that are, maybe they're not in the 75 and older, maybe it's in the 65 to, 70, who knows, but call. This is one of the things that I personally, every single day on my way home from work, I will call my mom and dad, and I will just say, hey, I'm not calling for any reason, but just to check in on you. How are you doing? How was your day today? Because again, as we go through our busy lives, we all want to feel seen and feel heard. We don't want to take for granted anybody in our lives. So make a phone call, make the time. I'm going to go towards more of the elderly population right now. Make the time to visit them. Sometimes people will say, as soon as I get time. But it's not about as soon as I get time. The time's not going to just come. You have to be very intentional about making the time. If you knew next year you wouldn't be around certain family members, what would you do differently? How much time would you spend with them? What would you ask? So really put a deposit into your own family and start there first. The second one is reach out to others. If you're finding yourself in a state of feeling lonely, left out, and you know that this is something that's chronic, don't pretend you're not lonely. Ask for help. Reach out to a friend. Be honest with family. Be honest and say, you know what? Hey, I'm needing to get plugged in somewhere because I'm struggling. Mm-hmm. If we pretend we're not going to get help, and that's really part of being proactive, is I'm asking and I'm raising my hand. I'm saying, hey, I'm struggling right now. In addition to that, I think just as humanity, we want to try and create a culture of a loneliness-free community. That may be a neighbor. It may be, like you said, the cashier that you strike up a conversation with. It doesn't have to be huge things, but if we all have in mind, Lord, who is it that maybe would benefit from a smile or a compliment or a hug? So just kind of put that on the radar and let's all create a community that is lonely free.
Yeah, raise your awareness when you're interacting with others.
That's right. Don't assume. Don't get so busy, because in our hectic world, it is so easy to become so consumed with our busy schedules, and then we get exhausted and we don't have the energy and we just want to go home, and, neighbors anymore really don't get out and talk to each other. They go home, open the garage door, drive their car in, shut the garage door, and they are in their own worlds. And I laugh because just, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I have a neighbor across the street, and I'm determined we're getting to know each other, and we are building a friendship. But I sent her a text in the evening, and I just said, do you want to come out and play? Just like we were little girls. You want to come out and play? And I had 2 chairs there, and we've really begun to develop a relationship, but it's intentional. So look around you because there is lots of people to connect with.
And I'd like to circle back to that thing I brought up about Sandy Patty and what they do in the Pestless family. That's her new last name. And that is to ask about the high and the low versus, well, how was your day, Kim? Oh, it was
fine.
Good. It was fine.
Yeah.
It was good. Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, that connection score is going to be very low if that is your question.
Right. because you're not even waiting for the answer.
No,
You're already in your mind, I'm going to ask you so I get a quick answer so I can begin talking about myself. Or so I can go on
Right.
to the next thing.
like, I did my duty. I asked how she was or how her day was, and now I'm done.
Sure. I'll tell you, with even like really young children, something that you can do like at a dinner table is, and I used to do this when my twins were little, is I would tell them, I'd make a game of it, and I would say, okay, now Matthew, only tell me one thing about your day, because I want Michelle to be able to tell me only one thing. Don't tell me two. And we made a game of it where they would actually share something. It was an enjoyable, and then I would follow up with questions like, hey, who did you sit with at lunch today? What did you do at recess? So I'm actually showing an interest. So as the parents, as the adults, we may have to carry more of the weight of carrying that conversation, but thankfully we're the adults. The next thing is increasing the number of meaningful interactions you have.
Okay, so here's where I want you to really define meaningful. What does that look like? Let's break that down so we can copy it.
Sure. Meaningful interactions are, first of all, intentional. There's a purpose to them. I am slowing down, being very mindful. When I'm talking to you, I'm asking a question and I'm giving you my eye contact. I am letting you know that I see you, I hear you. Meaningful interactions can be proactive. I'm having to put myself out there, maybe outside of my comfort zone. I'm having to try new things. I'll give you an example of a meaningful interaction. My mom has a Bible study of women, and it is, I would say, probably mostly age 60 and older, but they've met for like 30 years, 35 years. And when somebody first goes, you can feel like alone. You can go in with this idea, nobody's going to like me, nobody's going to talk to me, and we kind of create these self-fulfilling prophecies. But as I begin to do a meaningful interaction, as I am putting myself out there, I'm being proactive. I may initiate a conversation. I may, look for opportunities. I may join a church group. I may join a small group. I may volunteer somewhere. I'm actually making them very proactive, very intentional, and I'm putting myself out there. And it's vulnerable. I think that's a part of it, is you make yourself vulnerable.
Now, I want to mention that I was at a resident mingle or resident mixer, because I live in an apartment, by the way. And so about twice a year, the management will do a resident mingle, and there will be little, finger foods and drinks and stuff like that. And so I like to show up just because I think it's good to show up to things like that and know at least some of your neighbors that will show up to these things. And so there was a gal there, and she is living here temporarily in the apartment complex where I live, and she's from New York. And you could just tell that she was a proactive connection maker type person. And I love that she didn't ask, what do you do?
Right.
Because I'm always ready for the what do you do question. And then you get okay. One of those.
Right.
But her question was, what are your hobbies? And I thought, how clever. Because, see, that what are your hobbies tapped into what really brings me joy. And now my work does bring me joy, but just that question of what are your hobbies? In fact, let me just ask you, Kim, what are your hobbies?
My hobbies are, my husband and I go to Table Rock Lake, and we go on the boat. He likes to tinker outside. I like to write. That's actually a hobby. I like to write. I like to take pictures. I like to sing. And I like to mingle. I like to meet people. That's one of the things that it's not a hobby, but it's one of the things that brings me joy.
And how did that make you feel emotionally when I asked about your who instead of asking about your do? How did that make you feel just then?
Seen, heard, and it makes you think. Now, I wonder if somebody didn't have any hobbies, I wonder how that would make them feel, but it may bring an awareness of I need some hobbies.
Well, that's exactly what it did for me, because I had to think. I had to think, what were my hobbies?
What did they used to be?
What did they used to be?
Yeah.
And then that was like, uh-oh.
But what a great question. What a great question. And I think that goes a little bit with our society now, is we are doers, achievers, and that's where we find our worth. But that's also where we get burnout. And so there's a part of being able to, even whether it's what brings you joy, whether it is a good question, I think would be, tell me something, tell me about yourself. Because that way you can tell me anything you feel comfortable with. And it may not be, what, how do I answer? But I think those are great questions.
You know what I wrote down in my notes, which are different from your notes,
Right.
and that is that reaching out to people to bust loneliness in their lives,
Yeah.
That's a great mission field.
I had an experience just in the last maybe month and a half. My 26-year-old son came to my house and he said, Mom, he goes, I've decided that I am going to try and meet at least one new person every week and find out something about them, kind of go into their world and just be very proactive on that. And I thought, well, if my 26-year-old son can do that, I can do that. So the following day, it was in my mind, I'm going to meet somebody new this week. And I happened to be, there was a store that I had been wanting to go to, and I drove to it, but it hadn't opened yet. So I thought, well, I'm just going to go to a restaurant ahead of time and just kind of, pass some time. And I saw a restaurant, and I was going to go there, but then I caught Chick-fil-A. I'm doing a plug for Chick-fil-A, was across the street, and I thought, I'm going to run over there. And when I did, I went inside, and typically I would just go through the drive-through, but I went inside, and as I was standing in line, I noticed a man behind me, and he looked lonely. And he was probably, I don't know, maybe 60 years old, and so I got up to the checker, like where they're taking my order, and she said, will that be all? And I turned around and I looked at him and I said, could I buy your lunch today? And his face lit up and he said, well, sure. And so we placed our order and we're stepped to the side. And I said, you don't just have lunch with me today.
Wow.
And that's not typically something I would do. Now, I felt safe because I'm in a restaurant. Nothing's going to happen to me. But I asked him, I said, would you like to come sit down with me and just have lunch today? And I found out so much about this man that had moved from California, had no family, and he was lonely. And at the end of our meeting, I thanked him for the honor of meeting him. I said, thank you for spending this time with me. You didn't have to. And he said, I walked in here really lonely and dejected. And he goes, and you changed my day. Now, I didn't do anything that anybody can't do. It was just stopping to turn around and notice the people around. And that's the whole part about connections. You don't have to be a professional connector. You can simply say, hi, I'm Kim.
I applaud you for that, Kim. And I bet you $1 to donuts, as they say, that others that were in line were staring or playing with their phones.
They were. Yeah. You turn around and I don't want to point fingers because, sometimes I'm like that. I think we all do that at times, and we can catch ourselves in that, but that's something that I'm being very intentional about.
All right, you gave me something during the break, and I said, well, let's just talk about it on air, but I really don't know what I'm looking at here.
Sure.
It's a piece of paper, and it has 6 pictures on it.
Right.
And I think I can tell what's going on here.
What's going on?
Well, the top left picture is a couple in bed, so I'm going to assume they're married.
Right.
And they both have their backs to each other, and they're both looking at their cell phones.
Right.
Okay? And then the picture to the right...
Well, let me stop for a second because you say they're looking at their cell phones, but this photographer, he took, and where people were holding cell phones, he removed the cell phones from the picture. So all you're seeing is they're looking at their hands.
Okay, well, I don't have my glasses on.
Well, just so that you know what you're looking
Okay.
at, it's not just that they're looking at their phones. He, photoshopped the phones out of the picture. And so take that out of the picture and look how disconnected these people look.
Yeah. And so the picture to the right is of 3 little boys, maybe they're brothers or cousins or whatever. They look like they're about 7, 8, and 9. And they all have their heads bent down because they are looking at their empty hands.
That's right, which would be where their cell phones are. Yeah, they're not playing, they're not interacting. They're simply in their own world sitting beside each other.
Oh, and here's one that that Chick-fil-A wants to bust, and that is it's a restaurant, and the waiter's there with a little order pad in his hand, and you've got 3 people that are looking down.
Right.
Looks like a mom and 2 kids, and they're looking at their hands again.
Right. It's disconnected. I'll tell you my favorite one on there is there's a picture of a bride and a groom. And the bride and the groom are at opposite ends of the car, and they're both on their cell phones, or they're photoshopped out. But I'm sure they're both posting, hey, just got married. And so I'm writing about what's just happened rather than being in that moment. So I think that really, the reason I gave that to you was to recognize we need to set boundaries. We're talking about what can we do. One of the things is put boundaries around social media, technology. There are good positive uses. It may be where I've got family in Canada, and you know what? I can FaceTime my aunt who's in Ontario, and it makes us feel connected. So I'm not saying all technology is bad. It's just use it for a tool that actually is helpful.
Well, what a great conversation we have had today, Kim. And earlier I mentioned that you have a PDF for those who reach out to you, and reaching out would be an email to kim@there'shopehere.com. And as we say goodbye, tell us what you will send to anybody who emails and asks for
Sure.
it.
I've got a PDF that talks about how do I make friends, because many people don't know how to make friends. And then the second part of it is where do I meet friends? So it's a list of ideas of not only how, but where can I go to meet friends.
All right, that's kim@there'shopehere.com. Just ask for the, not loneliness PDFs.
How about the friendship PDF?
There you go. And your website again is there'shopehere.com, or area code 918-277-0777. Well, it's been another great roadshow, Kim. Thank you so much for your time today. Kim Harr has been here. I'm David Warren, and before we sign off, I want to read a quote that I hear our co-host and friend Tom Arnold say frequently, and I think it applies to today's program. And here's Pastor Tom's quote. I went out to find a friend, but could not find one there. Then I went to be a friend and found friends everywhere.
Mm-hmm. How wonderful.
It's been
How true.
Another great roadshow. You've been listening to The Road Show. If you'd like to write to us, here's our address. The Road Show, P.O. Box 1924, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 74101. Our email address is roadshow@oasisnetwork.org. The views of today's guest aren't necessarily those of this station, but we do appreciate and thank our guest for spending this time with us. The Road Show, an Oasis Network presentation.